Maya Rodriguez had always believed that love was supposed to feel like coming home. That's what her grandmother used to tell her during those long summer afternoons in the kitchen, where the smell of fresh tortillas and the sound of telenovelas created a soundtrack of comfort and wisdom. Her grandmother would pat her hands with flour-dusted fingers and say, "Mija, when you find the right person, you won't have to work so hard to make them love you. They will see your worth without you having to prove it every day." But at 23, standing in the bathroom of her small apartment at 6 in the morning, staring at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test, Maya realized that she had spent the last year and a half doing exactly what her grandmother had warned against. She had been working overtime to earn love from someone who had never seen her as anything more than a convenient distraction. The pregnancy test trembled in her hands as she tried to process the reality of her situation. She was pregnant. Pregnant by a man who had made it clear through his actions, if not his words, that she was replaceable, disposable, someone to be enjoyed when it was convenient and ignored when it wasn't. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was discovering this life-changing news alone in her bathroom, just as she had been alone through most of the significant moments of their relationship. David Chen had swept into her life like a summer storm, all intensity and passion and promises that felt too good to be true. They had met at a gallery opening where Maya was working as a freelance photographer, capturing candid moments for the artist's portfolio. David had approached her during a quiet moment when she was changing camera lenses, commenting on her equipment with the kind of technical knowledge that suggested genuine interest rather than a pickup line. He was beautiful in the way that made people turn their heads on the street, tall and lean with an artist's aesthetic sensibility reflected in his carefully chosen vintage clothing and the expensive watch that suggested success in whatever creative field he occupied. His smile was warm and engaging, and when he looked at Maya, she felt like she was the only person in the room that mattered to him. "You have an interesting perspective," he had said, looking through the viewfinder of her camera with permission. "Most people would be photographing the paintings, but you're capturing the way people respond to the art. That's much more compelling storytelling." Maya had felt a flush of pride at his assessment. Photography was her passion, though she was still building her portfolio and reputation while working part-time at a coffee shop to pay rent. Having someone recognize her artistic vision felt validating in a way that made her immediately trust him more than she probably should have. They had talked for the rest of the evening about art, creativity, and the challenge of making a living as an artist in a city that was both inspiring and financially demanding. David told her he was a graphic designer who had recently started his own freelance business, specializing in brand identity for restaurants and small businesses. He spoke about his work with the kind of passion that Maya found attractive, and she felt an immediate connection to someone who understood the struggle of pursuing creative dreams while managing practical responsibilities. Their first date had been everything Maya had hoped for and more. David took her to a small restaurant in the arts district that she had never heard of but that served the kind of innovative fusion cuisine that made her feel sophisticated and worldly. He asked thoughtful questions about her photography, her background, her dreams for the future. He listened with apparent genuine interest to her stories about growing up in a tight-knit Mexican-American family where education and hard work were valued above everything else. "You have this way of seeing beauty in ordinary moments," David had said over dessert, referring to some photographs she had shown him earlier. "It's like you understand that the most important stories happen in the spaces between the obvious drama." Maya had gone home that night feeling like she was floating on air. David was intelligent, creative, supportive of her artistic ambitions, and seemed genuinely interested in her as a person rather than just physically attracted to her. When he texted her the next morning to say he had been thinking about their conversation and wanted to take her to a photography exhibition the following weekend, Maya felt like she might have found someone who could be a real partner in both life and creative pursuits. The first few months of their relationship had been intoxicating. David was attentive and romantic, planning thoughtful dates that showed he had been listening to her interests and preferences. He brought her flowers that weren't generic roses but specific blooms he had noticed her photographing in the botanical garden. He introduced her to new artists, new restaurants, new experiences that expanded her world in exciting ways. More importantly, he seemed to value her opinions and insights. When he was working on design projects, he would ask for her input on color palettes and composition. When they visited galleries together, he encouraged her to share her perspective on the artwork and seemed genuinely interested in how her photographer's eye interpreted visual storytelling differently than his designer's perspective. Maya began to imagine a future with David that included creative collaboration, mutual support for each other's artistic ambitions, and the kind of partnership she had always wanted but never quite believed she deserved. She introduced him to her family, who were initially cautious but gradually warmed to his charm and apparent genuine affection for Maya. But somewhere around the 6-month mark, subtle changes began to creep into their relationship. David became less available for regular dates, citing increased work pressure and demanding clients. Their conversations became more focused on his projects and challenges, with less curiosity about Maya's work and experiences. When they did spend time together, it was often at his apartment, where they would order takeout and watch movies rather than exploring the city and its cultural offerings as they had in the early days of their relationship. Maya initially attributed these changes to the natural evolution of a relationship, from the intense courtship phase to a more comfortable and sustainable dynamic. She told herself that it was normal for couples to spend more quiet time together and less energy on elaborate romantic gestures as they became more secure in their connection. But gradually, she began to notice that the changes weren't just about comfort and familiarity. David seemed to view her increasingly as someone who existed primarily for his convenience and pleasure, rather than as an independent person with her own needs and aspirations. Their physical relationship, which had initially felt passionate and mutual, began to feel more one-sided, as if David was focused primarily on his own satisfaction with less attention to her experience. When Maya tried to address these concerns, David had a talent for deflecting her complaints in ways that made her feel like she was being unreasonable or overly demanding. He would acknowledge her feelings but frame them as temporary stress responses or misunderstandings rather than legitimate relationship issues that needed to be addressed through behavioral changes. "You know I care about you," he would say when she expressed feeling neglected or taken for granted. "I'm just going through a really intense period with work right now. Things will settle down soon, and we can get back to spending more quality time together." Maya wanted to believe these reassurances, partly because she had invested so much emotional energy in the relationship, and partly because David could still be charming and affectionate when it suited him. But deep down, she was beginning to understand that her grandmother's wisdom had been accurate. She was working very hard to earn love from someone who had stopped seeing her worth, and the effort was exhausting her emotionally and spiritually. The final months of their relationship had been marked by increasing inconsistency from David and increasing anxiety from Maya. He would disappear for days without communication, then reappear with apologies and explanations that always seemed to place the responsibility for the distance on external circumstances rather than his own choices. Maya found herself constantly trying to read his moods and adjust her behavior to avoid conflict, walking on eggshells around someone who had once made her feel confident and valued. When Maya discovered she was pregnant, her first emotion wasn't joy or fear, but a terrible clarity about just how alone she had become in a relationship that was supposed to be a partnership. She was facing the most significant news of her life, and she already knew that David's response would be focused on how the pregnancy affected him rather than how they could face this challenge together. Standing in her bathroom, holding that positive pregnancy test, Maya made a decision that would define the rest of her life. Whatever happened next, she was going to prioritize her own well-being and the well-being of this unexpected child over her desperate hope that David would somehow transform into the partner she needed him to be. She was 23 years old, financially unstable, and completely unprepared for parenthood. But as she looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, Maya saw something in her own eyes that she hadn't seen in months: determination, strength, and the beginning of self-respect that had been slowly eroded by a relationship that demanded everything and gave back almost nothing. Chapter 2. The Conversation. Maya spent 3 days after discovering her pregnancy trying to figure out how to tell David. She rehearsed the conversation in her head during her shifts at the coffee shop, imagining different ways he might respond, and trying to prepare herself for scenarios ranging from unexpected joy to complete rejection. The uncertainty was almost as difficult to manage as the morning sickness that had begun to make her daily routine more challenging. She finally decided to tell him during one of their increasingly rare dinner dates. David had suggested meeting at a casual restaurant near his apartment, the kind of place where they could talk without too much background noise or distraction. Maya arrived early, her stomach churning with anxiety that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones and everything to do with the knowledge that this conversation would likely determine the future of their relationship. David arrived 20 minutes late, apologizing briefly for his delay while checking his phone messages in a way that suggested his attention was still partly focused on work obligations. Maya watched him settle into his chair across from her and felt a familiar pang of disappointment at his inability to be fully present even during their limited time together. "You look tired," David said, glancing up from his phone long enough to notice her pale complexion and the dark circles under her eyes that concealer hadn't quite managed to hide. "I've been having some health issues," Maya replied, deciding to ease into the topic rather than delivering the news abruptly. "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about tonight." David's expression shifted to mild concern, though he continued to glance at his phone intermittently. "No, you've seemed a little off lately, but I figured it was just stress from work or something." Maya took a deep breath, realizing that there was no way to make this conversation easy or comfortable for either of them. "David, I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them for several seconds while David processed what she had said. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, calculation, before settling into something that looked like resignation mixed with annoyance. "Are you sure?" he asked finally. "I mean, have you seen a doctor, or are you just going by one of those home test things?" "I've taken 3 home tests, and they were all positive," Maya replied. "I have an appointment with a doctor next week to confirm, but the tests are very accurate." David leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair in a gesture that Maya recognized as his response to unwelcome stress.
"This is really not good timing for me," he said, speaking more to himself than to her. "I'm trying to expand my business, and I've got several major projects that need my full attention over the next few months." Maya felt a chill at his response, though she realized she shouldn't have been surprised by his immediate focus on how the pregnancy would affect his professional goals, rather than their relationship or her well-being. "I understand that the timing isn't ideal," Maya said carefully. "It's not ideal for me either, but we need to talk about what we're going to do together, how we want to handle this situation." David was quiet for several minutes, apparently calculating various options and their potential impact on his life plans. When he finally spoke, his tone was distant and practical, rather than emotional or supportive. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I mean, what are you thinking in terms of options?" Maya had hoped he would express some feelings about the pregnancy itself, some indication of how he felt about the possibility of becoming a father, or about their relationship moving into this new territory. Instead, he was treating the situation like a logistical problem that needed to be solved efficiently. "I'm thinking about keeping the baby," Maya said, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "I know we haven't talked about children or long-term plans, but I'm not sure I could live with myself if I made a different choice." David's expression darkened slightly, and Maya could see him struggling with frustration that he was trying to keep under control. "Maya, you have to understand that I'm not ready for this kind of responsibility. I'm 25 years old, I'm trying to build a career, and I'm not in a position to be a father right now. I'm not asking you to be ready," Maya replied, feeling her own frustration beginning to surface. "I'm asking you to be willing to figure this out together. People have babies all the time without feeling completely prepared. We could make this work if we both committed to trying." David shook his head, his body language becoming more closed off and defensive. "It's not that simple. Having a child changes everything about your life, your priorities, your freedom to make choices about your career and your future. I'm not willing to give up everything I've worked for because of one mistake." Maya felt like she had been slapped by his characterization of their pregnancy as a mistake, though again she realized she shouldn't have been surprised by his inability to see the situation from any perspective other than his own. "So what are you saying exactly?" Maya asked, her voice becoming steadier as her expectations for his support continued to diminish. "Are you saying you don't want to be involved if I decide to have this baby?" David looked around the restaurant as if he were worried about other people overhearing their conversation, then leaned forward with the kind of intensity he usually reserved for discussing business deals. "Maya, I think you need to seriously consider whether having a baby right now is the right choice for you," he said in a low voice. "You're working part-time at a coffee shop, you're struggling to build your photography business, and you're barely making rent on your apartment. How are you going to support a child on top of all that?" Maya felt a surge of anger at his condescending tone and his apparent assumption that her financial situation made her unfit for parenthood. Plenty of people manage to raise children without perfect financial security, and plenty of people figure out how to balance career goals with family responsibilities. But why would you choose to make your life that much harder? David pressed. "You're talented and ambitious, and you have the potential to really succeed as a photographer. Having a baby now would derail all of that progress and trap you in a situation where you'd never be able to pursue your dreams." Maya realized that David was presenting his arguments as concern for her well-being, but that his primary motivation was clearly his own desire to avoid the complications that her pregnancy would create for his life. He wasn't actually worried about her career prospects. He was worried about being expected to provide financial or emotional support for a child he didn't want. "What if I told you that I've already decided to have this baby?" Maya asked, testing whether his position was based on genuine concern for her welfare or purely selfish motivations. David's mask of sympathetic concern slipped slightly, revealing irritation and resentment underneath. "Then I would say that's your choice to make, but you can't expect me to reorganize my entire life around a decision I don't agree with. So you're saying you won't be involved?" Maya clarified, wanting to understand his position clearly. "I'm saying that I think you're making a mistake, and I'm not going to pretend to be excited about something that I think will ruin both of our futures," David replied with the kind of blunt honesty that was both hurtful and clarifying. Maya sat in silence for several minutes, processing the reality that the man she had loved and trusted was essentially abandoning her during the most challenging situation of her life. She had known their relationship had problems, but she hadn't anticipated that he would be completely unwilling to even try to work together when faced with an unexpected challenge. "I need to understand something," Maya said finally. "Over the last year and a half, did you ever see me as someone you could build a life with, or was I always just a temporary distraction until something more convenient came along?" David looked uncomfortable with the directness of her question, apparently realizing that his response to the pregnancy had revealed more about his feelings than he had intended. "Maya, you're a great person, and we've had a lot of good times together," he said in the kind of diplomatic tone that politicians use to avoid answering difficult questions. "But we're both young, and we're both trying to figure out our careers and our futures. I never made any promises about long-term commitment." Maya felt a terrible clarity wash over her as she realized that her grandmother had been right all along. She had been working desperately to earn love from someone who had never seen her as anything more than a pleasant diversion, someone whose presence in his life was valued only as long as it remained convenient and uncomplicated. "You're right," Maya said, standing up from the table with a composure that surprised her. "You never made any promises, and I'm not going to ask you to make any now." David looked relieved that she wasn't going to argue further or try to pressure him into involvement he didn't want. "I think that's probably the best approach for both of us. You can make whatever choice feels right for you, and I'll respect that choice." Maya almost laughed at his suggestion that he was being respectful by abandoning her, but she was too exhausted by the conversation to point out the absurdity of his position. "Goodbye, David," she said simply, walking away from the table and leaving him to deal with the check and his own conscience. As Maya walked home through the cool evening air, she felt a strange mixture of devastation and relief. She was heartbroken about the end of her relationship and terrified about facing pregnancy and parenthood alone. But she was also freed from the exhausting effort of trying to maintain a connection with someone who had never valued her enough to stick around when things became difficult. For the first time in months, Maya felt like she could breathe deeply and make decisions based on her own needs and values rather than trying to accommodate someone else's convenience and comfort. Chapter 3. Building a New Life. The weeks following Maya's conversation with David were a blur of doctor's appointments, difficult family discussions, and the overwhelming task of completely restructuring her life around the reality of impending single motherhood. She threw herself into research about pregnancy, childbirth, and infant care with the same focused intensity she had once applied to perfecting her photography techniques. Maya's family's reaction to her pregnancy news had been complicated but ultimately supportive. Her mother had cried, first from disappointment, then from joy, then from worry about Maya's ability to handle everything alone. Her father had asked pointed questions about David's absence that Maya deflected with vague explanations about incompatible life goals. Her grandmother, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, had simply hugged Maya tightly and said, "Maya, babies are blessings, even when they come at inconvenient times." The financial reality of her situation was daunting but not impossible. Maya calculated that she could continue working at the coffee shop through most of her pregnancy, and she began aggressively pursuing photography clients to build up her savings before the baby arrived. She applied for every form of assistance available to single mothers, researched affordable childcare options, and created detailed budgets that accounted for everything from prenatal vitamins to diapers. Most importantly, Maya began to envision a life that was built around her own values and priorities, rather than someone else's expectations. She started planning how she could balance motherhood with her artistic ambitions, researching other photographers who had successfully managed creative careers while raising children. She discovered online communities of single mothers who offered practical advice and emotional support for women in similar situations. Maya also made the difficult decision to cut off all contact with David. She blocked his number, unfriended him on social media, and avoided places where she might encounter him accidentally. When well-meaning friends asked about his involvement in the pregnancy, Maya simply said that they had decided to pursue different paths and left it at that. This decision proved to be wise when David attempted to contact her several weeks after their restaurant conversation. He sent a series of text messages that suggested he was having second thoughts about his position, though Maya suspected his change of heart had more to do with guilt or social pressure than genuine desire to be involved in her life. "Maya, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I wonder if we could talk again," one message read. "Maybe I was too hasty in my reaction. Could we meet for coffee and discuss things more calmly?"
Maya stared at the message for a long time, considering whether David might have genuinely reconsidered his position, or whether this was just another example of his tendency to say whatever seemed most convenient in the moment. She remembered her grandmother's advice about actions being more important than words, and realized that David's actions over the past month had been a clear indication of his priorities. She deleted the message without responding, and continued with her preparations for single motherhood. By her second trimester, Maya had developed a routine that felt sustainable and even occasionally enjoyable. Her morning sickness had subsided enough that she could focus on work and planning without constant nausea. She had booked several profitable photography sessions for weddings and family portraits, building both her portfolio and her savings account. Maya also discovered that pregnancy had given her a new perspective on her photography that was making her work more compelling and emotionally resonant. She began documenting her own pregnancy journey, creating a series of self-portraits that captured the complex emotions of preparing for motherhood without a partner. The images were raw and honest in ways that her previous work had rarely achieved, and several photography blogs featured her series as an example of authentic personal storytelling through visual art. "Your pregnancy photographs are incredible," said Dr. Sarah Martinez, Maya's obstetrician, during a routine appointment. "They capture something that I see in many of my patients but that rarely gets documented honestly. The mixture of joy and fear and determination that comes with preparing for a major life change." Maya felt a flush of pride at the professional recognition, but more importantly, she felt like she was finally creating art that reflected her authentic experiences rather than trying to produce work that would appeal to others' expectations. The practical challenges of pregnancy were significant but manageable with careful planning and support from her family. Maya's mother accompanied her to ultrasound appointments, helping her navigate the medical system and offering the kind of emotional support that made the experience feel less isolating. Her sister helped her shop for baby supplies and offered to babysit once the child was born so Maya could continue pursuing photography work. Maya's friend circle also rallied around her in ways that surprised her with their generosity and practical support. Her coworkers at the coffee shop adjusted their schedules to accommodate her doctor's appointments and increasing fatigue. Her photography colleagues recommended her to potential clients and offered to help with equipment if she needed assistance managing heavy gear during the later stages of pregnancy. But perhaps most significantly, Maya began to develop a sense of pride and excitement about her pregnancy that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval or involvement. She found herself talking to her growing baby during quiet moments, sharing her hopes and plans for their life together. She decorated the small nursery corner of her apartment with photographs and artwork that reflected her cultural heritage and artistic sensibilities. Maya also started attending prenatal classes where she met other expectant mothers, including several other women who were preparing for single parenthood. These friendships provided both practical advice and emotional validation for her choice to proceed with the pregnancy despite David's abandonment. "The hardest part isn't the practical stuff," said Jennifer, a teacher who was expecting her first child after her partner left early in the pregnancy. "The hardest part is letting go of the fantasy you had about how this was supposed to happen, and accepting that the reality might actually be better than what you originally planned." Maya found this perspective both comforting and empowering. She had grieved the loss of her imagined future with David, but she was beginning to see that future as a limitation rather than a loss. Being responsible only for her own decisions and priorities felt liberating after 18 months of trying to accommodate someone else's convenience and comfort. During her third trimester, Maya made a decision that felt like the final step in claiming ownership of her new life. She legally changed her last name back to her mother's maiden name, choosing to honor her matrilineal heritage rather than maintaining the more anglicized surname she had adopted in college. Her daughter would carry the name Rodriguez, connecting her to generations of strong women who had overcome challenges through determination and mutual support. "Elena Rodriguez," Maya said aloud one evening, trying out the name she had chosen for her daughter. "You're going to be loved so much, little one, and you're going to grow up knowing that you were wanted and chosen, even if the circumstances weren't what I originally planned." As Maya prepared for labor and delivery, she felt a strength and confidence that had been absent during her relationship with David. She was scared about the practical challenges of new motherhood, but she was no longer scared about her ability to make good decisions and provide a loving home for her child. Maya had learned that love wasn't something she needed to earn through exhausting effort and accommodation. Love was something she could give and receive naturally when she was with people who valued her inherent worth, and the love she already felt for her unborn daughter was proof that she was capable of creating the kind of relationship she had always wanted, one based on unconditional acceptance and mutual devotion. Chapter 4, Elena's Arrival. Maya's labor began on a rainy Tuesday morning in March, 3 days before her due date, and exactly 2 hours before she was supposed to photograph a client's engagement session. She woke up with mild cramping that she initially attributed to the restless night she'd spent trying to find a comfortable sleeping position with her enlarged belly. But when the cramping intensified and developed a regular pattern, Maya realized that her carefully planned preparation timeline was about to be compressed into whatever time nature decided to allow. Her mother arrived at the apartment within 20 minutes of Maya's phone call, bringing the overnight bag they had packed weeks earlier and the calm competence that came from having raised 4 children herself. Maya's sister Carmen met them at the hospital, armed with cameras to document Elena's arrival and snacks to sustain them through what everyone hoped would be a straightforward labor and delivery. "How are you feeling, Mia?" Maya's mother asked as they settled into the labor and delivery room that would be Maya's home for the next several hours. "Scared," Maya admitted honestly, "but also excited and grateful that you're both here with me." The early hours of labor were manageable, filled with conversation between contractions and anticipation about meeting the baby who had been growing inside Maya for the past 9 months. Maya walked the hospital corridors with her mother's support, focusing on breathing techniques she had learned in childbirth classes and trying to stay relaxed despite the increasing intensity of her contractions. As labor progressed and became more demanding, Maya found herself drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Each contraction required her complete attention and focus, leaving no mental energy for worry about the future or regret about the past. She existed entirely in the present moment, working with her body to bring her daughter safely into the world. "You're doing so well," the nurse assured Maya during a particularly intense phase of labor. "Your baby is in a perfect position and everything is progressing exactly as it should." Maya's mother held her hand through the most difficult contractions, offering Spanish words of encouragement and strength that connected Maya to generations of women in her family who had experienced this same profound transformation. Carmen documented the experience with sensitive photography that captured Maya's determination and grace under pressure. Elena Rodriguez was born at 7:23 p.m., weighing 6 pounds and 8 ounces, with dark hair and dark eyes that seemed to take in her new environment with curious intensity. The moment the doctor placed her on Maya's chest, wet and squirming and absolutely perfect, Maya felt a love so overwhelming and immediate that it seemed to reshape her understanding of what love could be. "Hello, baby girl," Maya whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her daughter for the first time. "I'm your mama, and I've been waiting so long to meet you." Elena quieted at the sound of Maya's voice, apparently recognizing the woman who had been talking to her for months through the walls of the womb. Her tiny fingers wrapped around Maya's thumb with surprising strength, and Maya felt the absolute certainty that this child was exactly who she was meant to love and protect for the rest of her life. Maya's mother and sister cried as they witnessed the first meeting between Maya and Elena, understanding that they were observing something sacred and transformative. Carmen captured photographs of those first moments that would become treasured family heirlooms, documenting the beginning of Maya's identity as a mother. The following days in the hospital were a mixture of wonder, exhaustion, and steep learning curves as Maya adjusted to the realities of caring for a newborn. Elena was a good baby, alert and responsive when awake, relatively calm when fussy, and blessed with the ability to sleep for reasonable stretches that allowed Maya to rest between feeding sessions. Maya marveled at Elena's tiny features and expressions, spending hours studying her daughter's face and trying to understand the personality that was already emerging through her reactions and preferences. Elena seemed to prefer her mother's voice to others, calming quickly when Maya sang the Spanish lullabies her own mother had sung during her childhood. "She knows you," observed the lactation consultant who helped Maya establish breastfeeding. "Some babies take time to adjust to life outside the womb, but Elena seems very comfortable with you already." Maya felt a deep satisfaction at this observation, recognizing it as validation of the bond she had been building with her daughter throughout pregnancy. All those conversations with her unborn baby, all those moments of planning and preparation, had created a foundation of connection that was already visible in Elena's responses to her mother's care. When it came time to complete Elena's birth certificate, Maya faced a moment she had been dreading throughout pregnancy. The form requested information about the father, and Maya had to decide how to handle David's absence from their daughter's life. After consulting with her mother and the hospital social worker, Maya chose to list herself as the sole parent, leaving the father's information blank. "You can always add that information later if circumstances change," the social worker explained. "But for now, you're Elena's only legal parent, which gives you complete decision-making authority about her care and upbringing." Maya felt both sadness and relief at this decision. Sadness because Elena would grow up without a father's love and support, but relief because Maya would be able to make parenting decisions based entirely on Elena's best interests, rather than having to accommodate someone else's convenience or preferences. The drive home from the hospital was both thrilling and terrifying. Maya sat in the back seat next to Elena's car seat, watching her sleep and feeling the weight of complete responsibility for another person's well-being. Her apartment looked different when they arrived, transformed by Elena's presence from a single woman's living space into a family home. Maya's mother stayed for the first week, helping with meals and laundry while Maya adjusted to the demands of round-the-clock newborn care. Elena ate every 2 to 3 hours, requiring Maya to completely restructure her sleep schedule around her daughter's needs. The exhaustion was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced, but it was accompanied by a sense of purpose and fulfillment that made the sacrifice feel worthwhile. Every new mother feels overwhelmed at first, Maya's mother reassured her during a particularly challenging night when Elena seemed unable to settle despite being fed, changed, and comforted. "You're doing everything right. Elena is healthy and loved, and that's what matters most." Maya began documenting Elena's early weeks through photography, creating a visual diary of their new life together. The images captured both the tenderness of their bond and the reality of new motherhood. Maya nursing Elena in the early morning light, Elena sleeping peacefully in her crib, the chaos of baby equipment that had taken over every surface of the apartment. These photographs became part of a new body of work that Maya titled Love Letters to Elena, a series that explored the transformation of identity that accompanies motherhood. Several parenting magazines expressed interest in featuring the series, recognizing Maya's ability to capture universal experiences of new parenthood with artistic sophistication and emotional honesty. As Elena's first month progressed, Maya developed confidence in her ability to read her daughter's cues and respond to her needs. Elena was a communicative baby who expressed her preferences clearly through different types of crying, body language, and facial expressions. Maya learned to distinguish between hunger, fatigue, overstimulation, and the need for comfort, developing the kind of intuitive understanding that surprised her with its strength and accuracy. "You're a natural at this," Carmen observed during one of her frequent visits to help with baby care and household tasks. "Elena is so content and alert. You can tell she feels secure and loved." Maya felt proud of this assessment, recognizing that her decision to proceed with single motherhood despite David's abandonment had been the right choice for both her and Elena. Her daughter was thriving in an environment of unconditional love and consistent care, free from the tension and disappointment that would have characterized their home if David had remained reluctantly involved. Most importantly, Maya was discovering that motherhood enhanced rather than diminished her sense of self. Caring for Elena required her to be more organized, more efficient, and more intentional about her time and energy.
These skills were improving her photography business as well as her personal life, helping her provide better service to clients while maintaining the creative vision that made her work distinctive. Elena had not derailed Maya's dreams as David had predicted. Instead, she had given Maya new motivation to succeed and new perspectives to explore through her art. Maya was determined to build a life that would make Elena proud, demonstrating that single motherhood could be a source of strength rather than limitation. Chapter 5: Growing Together. Elena's first year was a period of profound growth and discovery for both mother and daughter. Maya documented every milestone with the meticulous attention of both a devoted parent and a professional photographer, creating a comprehensive visual record of Elena's development from helpless newborn to curious, mobile toddler. Elena was an early walker, taking her first independent steps at 10 months old with the kind of fearless determination that suggested she inherited Maya's ambitious nature. She was also an early talker, saying mama at 7 months and gradually building a vocabulary that included Spanish words taught by her grandmother alongside the English that dominated their daily conversations. She's going to be bilingual from the start, Maya's mother observed with satisfaction during one of her regular babysitting sessions. That's an advantage that will serve her well throughout her life. Maya was grateful for her family's consistent support, which made it possible for her to continue building her photography business while providing Elena with attentive care. Her mother watched Elena 2 days a week, allowing Maya to photograph weddings and portrait sessions that required focused attention and professional demeanor. Carmen helped with evening babysitting when Maya had editing work to complete or client meetings to attend. The photography business was thriving in ways that surprised Maya with their success. Her series documenting single motherhood had gained attention from parenting publications and photography blogs, leading to speaking engagements and workshop opportunities that established her reputation as an artist who could capture authentic human experiences with both technical skill and emotional depth. "Your work has this honesty that's really rare," commented Maria Santos, the editor of a national parenting magazine that featured Maya's photography. "You're not romanticizing motherhood or presenting it as either all wonderful or all difficult. You're showing the complexity and the real emotions, which is what parents actually experience." Maya felt proud of this recognition, understanding that her artistic success was directly connected to her willingness to be vulnerable and authentic about